what I didn't know, it took several weeks to find this out, but he was a friend of Eric Volt's. In those early days, no decisions were made outside of Mike. Every person brought in my opinion, down to Dr. Brown. Bickle approved it.
Recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen, unfortunately, Michael Brown has been in the news for his own situation, and he was involved very early in the allegations with Mike Bickle and IHOP. So what was your experience with Dr. Michael Brown in that process?
Yeah, I mean, several of us, we've had, I don't know what, decade plus relationship with Dr. Brown. And so he was a mutual friend, or at least a mutual, leader that we were all very aware of and history with and knew personally. Dr. Brown, when he first showed up, he called me, we talked on the phone, not just with me, but with several of us that were in the advocate group. And just for clarity, the advocate group title, we're friends. We never had a group name. People are always kind of like, so you're a part of the advocate group. And I'm like, well, no, I'm actually a part of a 20-year friendship of people standing together to bring accountability to Mike. And yeah, we were somehow through all that, we got named at this advocacy group. And then it was 100 people, 200 people, or 4 people. And I'm like, I don't know even who is defined as. Anyways, that's just a little side note, because there's so much speculation about who is that group. But back to Dr. Brown. It was interesting because here we were in the thick of things, and he shows up, and what I didn't know, it took several weeks to find this out, but he was a friend of Eric Volt's. And so he had been talking with Eric behind the scenes and just getting daily updates and briefings from Eric. And so there was a bit of him positioning himself, in my opinion, that he had an inside take on things that we didn't have. And that wasn't helpful. He was interjecting into a situation where, again, with Dwayne and myself and Brian and Alan and Jono, we had all worked there. We had been a part of this ministry and Mike's life for 20 plus years. We had a lot of history with the ELT, the executive leadership team at the time, 20 years of friendship. We had been interacting with them. So it was a little awkward, when Dr. Brown inserted himself. It was awkward and hard because of, he kind of had an approach of not a know-it-all, but this is, a very strong opinion that he had on things. And we disagreed with his opinion pretty strongly, pretty boldly. So it was hard.
He went on even as late as, it was, I don't know if he still has this opinion that the original investigation was a true third-party investigation. And he went on his radio program saying that.
No, I don't know if it was ever public, but he had plenty of times where he was telling them, not just us, that he did disagree with them getting just a random law firm compared to a guidepost or a Grace type of investigative approach. He was pushing for guidepost and Grace very strongly, and disagreeing with them for hiring, I think it was Lathrop or whoever the name of the law firm was at the end. They went through 2 or 3 there in the early days. He was vocal.
It was the one that actually did the sort of partial investigation that really prompted Tammy Woods to come forward.
Right.
I heard him on his program say that was a third-party investigation.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because he's, now in his own situation, and his board, initially went and hired this, law firm, just, a typical law firm compared to a Grace, guidepost, etc. Now, since then, they have done pretty much the same steps that IHOP has done. They've moved away from that and are now, actively seeking to engage someone like a guidepost or Grace or Firefly, people like that. So that's
Sure.
interesting, just the way all that kind of shook out.
So your experience was it his involvement kind of hindered the process?
I mean, I don't think it helped. I don't know about
Okay.
hindering. I think the only thing that it hindered was probably his involvement didn't help personal relationships, for sure. It if anything, it wedged a, and I don't think he did this intentionally. I don't think he did any of it intentionally. I think unintentionally he just created more of a wedge between us and the ELT. I think Eric Voles did the most. Eric Voles did the biggest uh, wedging, if you will, between us and we're talking, Sliker, Stewart, Isaac, Lenny, Marcy. These are people that we've done life with for 20 plus years. And
Right.
so all of a sudden, the wedge between us, in my opinion, Eric was the primary person. Of course, Bickle was a huge person, but Eric and then Dr. Brown and what he did not help that vice. It created more divisiveness between us.
Who do you think uh, suggested Eric Voles or brought Eric Voles? You said he was friends with Dr. Brown.
Yeah, Dr. Brown knew him for several years. Stewart knew him. Mike knew him. Uh, Mike was, in those early days, no decisions were made outside of Mike. And so every person brought in my opinion, down to Dr. Brown, uh, was at the direction, in my opinion, I don't know this for a fact, but in my opinion, with Bickle, or at least Bickle approving it. It could have been Stewart's idea, but Bickle approved it. Sam would have been the only one because Sam didn't get invited. Sam showed up. Now Francis was invited by Stewart, and so I think when Francis came in, and him and Sam, what they didn't know is that Sam and Francis had already been talking to several of the victims and us extensively. I think if now Bickle ended up finding that out, and that's why he turned them away when they showed up at his house. But he didn't know that initially, and so yeah. But Dr. Brown, I would think it was probably either Mike's idea or Stewart's idea, uh, and there was always a reason. There was always a reason. Mike is he's a master manipulator, man. He's a master at doing everything. So Eric Voles, Eric knew there was stuff in the air as early as May. And that was out of his own admission. He admitted that in one of his, you know, interviews that he did with somebody. So he knew there was things in the air, and I assume, I guarantee Mike knew that. And so, yeah. And Eric believed that everything was mostly exaggerated. Even to this day, I would think that Eric would believe that Mike did some things wrong, but it was mostly exaggerated. He's mostly should be exonerated. I believe he believes that 110%. And that those are all my opinions, of course.
So he said something as early as May.
Yes.
May is when the big push of prayer and fasting for Israel
Right.
happened.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
think that that was manufactured?
I don't. I mean, I don't. If it was manufactured, there were 10 other reasons why it was being manufactured. I don't think this was the sole reason.
Well,
Uh,
because of the dark horse prophecy, right? When we go to the east,
yeah,
then the dark
and
horse of
and and and,
accusation.
and some of those things I think could have just happened and been convenient for him. Meaning, I don't know if he knew that Jane Doe was going to start talking the way she did. I mean, he knew she was talking. I don't think he knew she was going to go all the way talking. I think he was doing everything in his power to still contain it. And he didn't know other people were talking. And so I think he was, looking back now, I think through the years, Mike had all kinds of other people beginning to talk. So you have all these fires that you're trying to contain, right? I think through the years, it wouldn't surprise me at all if every big IHOP prophetic story swirl was around the fire beginning to heat up a little bit. And when I say fire, a negative, scandalous fire, and he would
Yeah.
he would create a distraction. And so was some of that in May, because he was talking as early as January and February, the whole Israel 21-day fast thing. He was beginning to stir that up in January, February. But there were other fires that were being stoked in January, February as well. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he, played into that as a big distraction in Israel, because one of the big lines that they were using against us still to this day is, don't you care for Israel? I mean, I think in one of Eric's interviews, he still had the audacity to even connect the dots of October 7th and this all happening. And then, of course, he would say, no, I'm just saying, isn't that a coincidence? He just said this on the Eric Metaxas show not too long ago. And I'm thinking, that disgusts me. That is so perverted at a mindset level. But he's drank the Kool-Aid. You spend time with Bickle like he did, you think, because I would want to say this to Eric, Eric, you think you can control narratives? You have no idea until you've spent time with Bickle. And Bickle spun him like a top. And, proof's in the pudding. I mean, he's still to this day pushing the narrative that Bickle is guilty, but it's big time exaggerated. And I believe he believes that. And what pains me is that I know he's, spilling that in his circles of influence. That pains me, because we have several mutual friends.
Well, so the investigation is still happening, and once that comes, the results of that come out, you mentioned that your hope would be that the body would say, okay, we're responding to this investigation and we agree with these findings. We're not going to platform somebody in this particular way. It sounds like what you're hoping for is similar to how Jack Deere, Mike Bickle, Rick Joyner, how they approached Paul Kane way back when, right? There was the investigation, and then there was a lack of repentance or going through any kind of restoration. So they essentially said, they had the public signing off saying, we do not approve of Paul Kane's ministry because we believe he's a danger.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's the expectation or hope from this investigation, is that the body would recognize it as a authoritative or giving glimpse into what's really been happening, and that they would respond and not try to give a microphone to somebody that could be dangerous or that is dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I think just the truth. I think that Mike, in a small swirl, not at large, but in a small way that's still significant for that world anyway, he's been spinning like crazy, spinning this. And so I'm hoping that, like Eric Voles, Eric Voles goes on the Eric Metaxas show just a few weeks ago. With a large audience, and they bring it up at the very, very end. And just the little bit that he did, it sows so much dismissiveness into it. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful that a statement that is coming from such, qualified, credible people like Tikkun, that has no, especially if they're going to use the Israel thing as their little, some kind
fig leaf
of upper hand of whatever, to have Tikkun come in and champion the investigation. I'm hopeful that this statement brings clarity to where statements like what Eric did on the Eric Metaxas show can be rebuffed, can be challenged,
right?
With the hey, that might be what you say, but you did read that, not just the final report, but how this group of leaders and pastors and leaders in the body of Christ, made up of all kinds of different people, their statement on the report. You did see that, right? And so that's what I'm hopeful for, that it brings clarity and necessary judgment. Yes. That'll go beyond Mike, by the way. It won't just be Mike. Right. It'll be beyond Mike.
I hope you enjoyed that clip of the Minor Profits podcast. If you'd like to see full episodes, they're right over here. And if you'd like to see more clips, right over here. And I'll see you in the next video.